the talent he is. Proper chatterbox yada. If you're keen, it'll be brilliant. Today, we're going to keep it simple. I'll bark out a basic command and you watch. Keen to know? He'll set your tail wagging. Does mine, hence why I'm backing him. Right then, Wookie here. Do take a seat, won't you? Give us your full attention while we listen to my pal, Yada.
I appreciate the backing there, Wookie, and even the fronting, as it may be in this case. We are going to return to the basics. We are deep into, I think this is the 4th episode of Shabuwah. We're not even a quarter of the way through, so we have a lot of programs yet to do on Shabuwah. This one's important for a lot of reasons. One is that we're on the cusp of the initial fulfillment of it. It's that would be only 2 months away. I think 57 days. We have a ticker on the yadayah.com site on time. If you check it, it's the first ticker. I think it's 57 days to the initial phase of the fulfillment of Shabuwah, which is the beginning of the time of Jacob's or Israel's troubles.
50 days.
50 days.
50 days, 23 hours.
Wow, 50 days. Time goes by. Boy, I tell you what, does sneak by. So 50 days to the initial fulfillment of Shabuwah. So we want to talk about what that represents. And we also want to know about the harvest and who qualifies and when that's going to occur, which we think will be 14 months thereafter, also, of course, on Shabuwah, as these two Shabuwahs represent 6 to 7 years from the time that the fall Miqra, piece, which would be Teruah, Kippurym, and Sukah, will be fulfilled. So there's a lot to learn. The second episode of Shabuwah, of course, is the Shabbat of June 11th of 2027. And we are approaching Pesach, Passover, in this year, the beginning of Chag Matsah. I had originally leaned towards doing it on a Friday evening, which is sort of nice and sort of not nice for us. Not that that matters a lot in the timing, and that it would coincide with our family hour, but that does make it a little difficult to celebrate a meal at sunset with Yahowah while you're trying to broadcast a show. It's I think it's probably better if it can be done the night prior, that we try to do it the night prior and continue to talk about it then on family hour as we celebrate Matsah. But Matsah is the bigger and more important day, more essential day. And last night I was out taking a stroll with our pooches, and I looked up in the sky, and it sure looked like a full moon. I checked from an astrological reading this morning because it looked so full, and it was 98%. Now, as it relates to the timing of Pesach and Matsah, one begins on the 14th, so it's the beginning of the 14th day, beginning of the 15th day of the month. A month starts when the sun's reflected light on the moon's surface first begins to wax. And that would mean with a 14 and a half day half cycle. So you'd go from a new moon to a full moon in 14 and a half days, and then go from a full moon back to the new moon in 14 and a half days. So that the full moon should normally coincide right between. So it's almost full in Pesach, and just past full, but, essentially full moon both for Pesach and Matsah. And with it being 98% full yesterday, I'm thinking that we're going to celebrate Pesach on Thursday evening as opposed to Friday evening, based upon the full moon. And yes, I know that we start the month and we look at the first crescent of the moon and we go the 14 days from there, but it should put us on a full moon. And the issue here was how much of the reflected light on the moon's surface was visible before sundown. and that would establish the countdown of the new moon nearest the vernal equinox. And yeah, it was a toss-up between 2 days, and originally I had leaned towards the latter of them, when I think we had like 3 to 4% renewed light on the moon surface, which is a lot, versus a range of 1%, which is not very much. But since it has to be, and it's supposed to be, and it's coordinated to be on a full moon. The same thing is true with the celebration of Sukah. Sukah is a full moon celebration. Pesach and Matsah are full moon celebrations. That's why you can very often have lunar eclipses on Pesach and Matsah, because of the positions of the relative position of the sun and moon when the moon is full. So this is what we're going to do, and I'm strongly leaning towards now us celebrating on Thursday evening. I did have a post we saw that was, I think, correctly answered by Kevin, that now that we have our own home for Yahweh's name, that we should all kind of do things in sync, so we're celebrating on the same day. I don't think that's actually necessary. I think we all have individual opportunities to look up the evidence. That's why we present the evidence for you. It is in Shana Years, the volume of Yahowah. You can look up the percentage of the renewed light on the moon's surface closest to the vernal equinox each year, and make your own determination as to what you think is the timing. And I don't think it matters much to Yahweh, so long as you're thoughtful about it, so long as you're making a genuine effort to listen to what he says and do what he has asked. The fact that there can be disagreements between people who are all thoughtful in this regard, I think, is actually a good thing. Keeps us from being dogmatic, and it shows that in a family we can have a disagreement over something that really isn't all that material, like should it be celebrated on Thursday evening or Friday evening, and that's fine. Now, there are many who have a conniption fit every time I say this. Oh, God wouldn't be a God of uncertainty. There has to be a time certain. No, he didn't give us a method to have a time certain. He didn't say observation versus astronomical. He didn't say what percentage of renewed light has to be on the moon's surface and what time that has to transpire. For example, if the renewed light on the moon's surface takes place at 11:59. Well, that's the next day, not that same day from the Hebrew point of view. So it's important to know the timing of it and the amount of it. And God made no distinction in this regard. He just talked about it's the month of Abib. The month of Abib, by its definition, is when barley is green and growing, but the winter crop is approaching the point where it can be harvested, where the grain would still be green and receptive, and the flax would be in bloom, and it's the time of a renewed light, the waxing light on the moon's surface, closest to that time, which in all practical purposes is the new moon nearest the vernal equinox. But since he didn't specify observation or astronomical, or what the criterion would be to ascertain which one you would, even once you choose one of those two, once one of those two is designated, which he didn't state, what the criterion would be for its final determination. And I think it's because he's not dogmatic on the details.
But the Christians and the religious are still very dogmatic.
Yeah, they want it to, it's got to be, it's Easter Sunday is a certain time, and you're celebrating a goddamn pagan myth. So understand the purpose, understand why Easter, which is celebrated very close to the same time this year, is an abomination to God. Why it's Babylonian in origin, and there is no correlation of any kind between Passover, Matsah, and Bikuwrym and Easter, and that the whole Christian mythos of a man God and a man God that men could kill and a bodily resurrected individual is just malarkey, absolute rubbish. So understand the purpose, capitalize on the purpose. We also notice that we have way too many people who are claiming to be covenant and are asking, what should I do on Passover? And that's why I really went into this discussion here, even though this is about Shabuwah. If you have to ask that question, you're not covenant. Seriously, you're just not covenant. Passover is such an important part of who we are, what we're doing. The recognition it was fulfilled by Dowd is so phenomenal, so different than the rest of the world. The recognition that it opens the door to life, that it is not a celebration of freedom from Egypt, that it's not a 7-day holiday. When you recognize who Yahowah is and who Dowd is, and all of the implications of it. I'll give you one that was shared in our chat room. Now, this is the antithesis of what do I do on this day. I think it was Mark Watsey. But the overall observation was, the Passover lamb, we're told, comes into the home 4 days before Passover. Interesting, huh? With the recognition that the soul of Adam was Dowd, therefore God's firstborn. He returned as the Passover lamb after having been brought into God's home here on earth 4,000 years or 4 days earlier. It ties in that whole concept on the fourth day of creation. There is the greater and lesser luminaries. The fourth day in our long march to God would be year 4,000 Yah. And so Dowd as Adam gets another notch of authenticity when we recognize that the lamb is supposed to be in the home for 4 days, and that would be symbolic of Dowd being Adam and coming back in the fourth day to serve as the lamb. That kind of thing is interesting. What should I do is not. As they say, read the F-bomb manual if you want to know what you're supposed to do. I mean, if you're not a reader, if you want to claim the benefits of the covenant without actually studying the material, it's not going to work for you because you can't even stop at studying the material. That's not enough. You got to act the part. If you're not observant, you're not covenant. If you're not thoughtful, you're not covenant. If you're not responsive, you're not covenant. And if you were responsive, but you decided to go and do something else and you just don't care about the covenant, or you want to actually criticize it, you're not covenant. It isn't once in, always in. And getting in and earning Yahweh's respect takes some doing. There is a test, just as there was for Abraham. Life is a test for us. God's not going to empower and eternally enrich people that he doesn't know, trust, and that haven't shown that they are observant, thoughtful, responsive, and reliable. So if you don't know, shame on you. In fact, don't announce that you don't know, because that's indicting. Read. I mean, why do you think we made the website? So these books are available to you in their entirety free. Where would you go if you wanted to learn about what do I do on Pesach?
And when you look at the terms and conditions 2 through 4 tell you what to do.
Yes, they do. The very terms and conditions of the covenant that are presented in the third volume of Yahowah tell you what to do. And the fourth volume of Yahowah, which is Miqra, appointments, it tells you everything God had to say about Passover. So that would be our advice. Anyway, we're going to celebrated here beginning on Thursday evening. So our family hour show on Friday will be a celebration of the most important day in this process, which is Matsah. All right, with that introduction, I have just one item in the news before we just jump into our basics, and that is that Trump is now, who is Rahab, he is the great betrayer of the world, of not just America, but also, and more importantly, of Israel, is now doubling and tripling down on he's going to declare victory and withdraw from this war without resolving the Strait of Hormuz. By the way, the Strait of Hormuz cannot be resolved. So that part makes sense. And war can't be won. So you might as well declare victory and leave. But leaving the Middle East and the mess that it is in and abandoning Israel after you started this war with them can be catastrophic. Now, there are nothing but catastrophic choices. That's why I begged Israel, and I wouldn't beg Donald Trump if my life depended on it, much less anyone else's. But I begged Israel not to do this thing because once in, there is no out. This was a catastrophic move for Israel, but they are going to be abandoned. They will likely be blamed. They are being blamed by many, but they will likely even be blamed by Rahab, Trump. But without the straits being open and calling an end to this war, it will have been one of the great disasters in all of human history. Certainly the greatest disaster in modern human history. And it will be a complete abandonment by the Gulf Arab Sunni states. If they were all destroyed by Iran, that would probably be a good thing. Not that Iran is good, but the family dictators are worse. So going to be an interesting ordeal. And with Israel now battling the Houthis again, who are very resilient, battling and losing this time to Hezbollah with significant casualties, and taking body blows from the Iranians and about to be abandoned by the U.S. This is a really bad time for Israel. So my advice to you, if you're an Israeli or if you're just a Jew, go to yahowah.com. You need to be reading. You need to come to embrace Yahowah. Abandon the rabbis. Abandon your political parties and save your own soul, because that's all that is salvageable at this point. Okay, speaking more of Shabuwah and its Katsir harvest, God says that the individuals who participate, they will exist as a means to become acceptable. This is not just the participant. These are actually, as we discussed in that last program, the metaphors that God has chosen for the men who fulfill each of the Moedim. And in this particular case, we've been talking about what happens in the fulfillment of Yom Kippurym, which I know jumps ahead in time, but we had to do that to have a better appreciation as to why the ram, the bull, and the goat were all woven into the story of Shabuwah. So to understand their role, we jumped ahead because God explains their role in great detail, all three of them, as it relates to the ultimate fulfillment of Yom Kippurym, the day of reconciliations, when Yahweh returns with his beloved son, Dowd, as our king. So he's speaking of the sacrifice that these three individuals, represented by the goat, the ram, and the bull, they are Elia as the goat, Dowd as the ram, and Yada as the bull, make to enable all of these benefits on behalf of Israel. So they exist as the means to become acceptable and to ascend to Yahweh. Their gift, and it is that, they're offering this sacrifice. The greatest gift was offered by Dowd as he fulfilled Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym. But their gift is poured out on their behalf by the feminine manifestation of the fiery light. What God is doing here is bringing together something that is essential to understand all the way through the Moed Miqra. We're constantly being asked to approach this feminine manifestation of God's fiery light. And it is symbolic of something that we were the first to share in these programs, and we'll be sharing again on Thursday night as we light our fire again by the pool, is that what God is offering through Pesach, Matsah, Bikuwrym, and Shabuwah is to transform us such that we are empowered and enriched and enabled and emancipated. We're freed of these physical bodies that keep us mired here on this earth, that decay, that have all manner of liabilities associated with them. And they preclude our ability to be free in the fourth dimension or enter the fifth, sixth, or seventh dimension of Shamayim. And the only way to be free of these physical bodies is for our soul, which is other dimensional, to be enveloped in energy and light as opposed to matter. And so this idea of approaching the feminine manifestation of the fire is symbolic of that. And it's, as I say, it's woven throughout the celebration of the Moed Miqra. And it's all because what God is offering to do by enriching and empowering us, emancipating us, enabling us, and making us immortal and literally perfecting us, if you will, ridding our souls of the burden and liability of religious and political guilt, is to envelop us in light and energy, because in light, all time exists. In light, there is no darkness. It's a beautiful metaphor. And if you look at what a fire does, it takes dying or dead organic material and it transforms it into radiant energy and light, which symbolically rises up, that warms us. It actually can purify metals and it can cook our food. It can purify water. It's a marvelous metaphor that speaks to us in many different ways. So their gift is poured out on their behalf, by this feminine manifestation of the fiery light. So it's these three men working in conjunction with Yahweh that enables this result. And it's a uniquely and welcoming, pleasing spirit of reconciliation of the relationship, all to approach Yahweh. Very direct, very simple to understand, and yet an understanding of how this transformation through light and energy, as a result of what Dowd fulfilled on Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, was first proclaimed here, 2,000 years after he fulfilled these dates. So what appears to be simple, forthright, beneficial, important for you to know, hasn't been known prior to the Yahowah series. So we have heard Yahweh delineate the menu for the feast of the promise of 7. And along the way, God described the benefits afforded to those who choose to embrace what he is offering. This pleasing and welcoming gift is poured out upon us by Yahweh through this symbolism of the fiery light, which could also represent, the ruach of Yahweh, thereby reconciling the relationship. Now, if you've harbored any doubts that these individuals to be called out and meet were descriptive of life within the covenant, or if they encapsulate God's mercy leading to vindication, I think those questions should have evaporated. God's a very good narrator. He tells us what we need to know. So contrary to theological explanations, the Torah does not portray a legalized works-based path to God. Mercy, leading to our reconciliation, lies at the core of the Miqra, which in turn forms the very heart of the Torah. So digging even deeper, we find that the primary meaning of Yahowah is a conciliation which reconciles parties that are engaged in a relationship, specifically what God's trying to achieve. Yahowah is from nuach, meaning that which brings rest and allows us to settle down and to remain. This resting place, this place of tranquility in the relationship, of course, is Shamayim, heaven. And our arrival is predicated upon us embracing the Riach, this pleasing spirit of Yahowah. Riach is very similar to Ruach, spirit. The Hebrew word Isha, depending on how you want to vocalize it, but spelled the same way in Hebrew, is translated as feminine manifestation of God's fiery light, or as a mother who, mother might be a bit of a stretch, but certainly as a woman. And so you have a choice, because Isha would mean woman, or Isha would be fire, but written with the feminine conclusion. You have really either one of those two. So you can make it female, or you can make it fire, or you can bring the two together and say it's the feminine manifestation of fire, or you can do what I like to do most of all. And that is, I've looked at so many words now in Hebrew where they are have an ending, and it has nothing to do with the gender of the subject. It has all to do with the fullness of that subject, because without the ending, it is considered masculine. With the ending, you've added a touch of femininity to the masculine word. And so the ending in Hebrew doesn't create a independent word. It takes a masculine word and a word still that retains all of its etymological masculinity and adds femininity to it. So it's the best of all worlds. It's a more complete appreciation of what God is talking about. Like par becomes para. Par is bull. It is a masculine term for bull. With the ending, it doesn't necessarily and typically doesn't make it a girly cow. It means that there is productivity and judgment and a resolute commitment to reason, but with tremendous passion within this bull. It completes the concept and takes it to the next dimension. It's like Ish being tree and Isha being everything pertaining to this particular tree, which was in the case of the Choder, and in the garden would be the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's a more expansive expression of the term. So it is an expansive expression of what fire can represent relative to our reconciliation with God and our benefiting from the Moed Miqra. I'm a huge fan of, you want to celebrate Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym in a way that shows that you understand and appreciate the symbolism and the intent of these days. Build a fire. Do what we did last year around a fire. Build a fire. Enjoy that fire. Because when you enjoy that fire, you watch the smoke go up. You're warmed by the fire. The fire is enlightening, brightening everything around you. It pierces the darkness of the evening. It draws people to it. it is a thing of real beauty as well. And when you realize, too, that it is the very thing that was used not only to prepare the lamb for consumption in Passover originally, but it is also the very fire that will be beneath the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah in our future. And that it is symbolic of us being transformed, which is why God's asking us to approach it. And transformed by getting rid of these physical bodies and being enveloped in the very essence of what that fire represents, light and energy. So when we celebrate Shabuwah, for example, and the harvest of Shabuwah, this is exactly what's going to happen. Our physical bodies, as a carrier of our nephesh souls, is going to be replaced by light and energy. That's why some of the metaphors of this day and of Towrah speak of a river of light from earth to the heavens. And if you understand that, then you're in a position to understand all the benefits of light, how Hebrew grammar is based on the concept of light, where everything is true throughout time. It's time full, like the existence of a photon of light. It's eternally true. It is enlightening. And it's empowering. When you take a piece of wood, it has a certain potential for energy, but when you light it on fire and it burns, that energy is intensified. Energy is the equivalent of matter, which you then have to multiply by the square of the speed of light to be the equivalent amount of energy. So energy is a vastly superior and quantity and character form of existence. All of these things are being shared with us. And it's important I think, to celebrate them. So as we move on, Yahowah's recipe for Shabuwah was not yet complete. Still speaking of the all are welcome. Well, certainly those who are receptive and willing to listen are welcome. If you're a naysayer, if you've been criticizing what we're sharing on behalf of God, you are not welcome. And God is happier to have walls around his celebrations and even his covenant than he is to have open doors. So, you're just not going to bring trash into God's home. And even now, as we have moved away from social media and into the yadayah.com website and our ability to communicate with one another there, that's our way really of saying covenant is as it is. It's not going to expand significantly because there's just not enough time for people to learn what they need to know and to demonstrate that they can be trusted with what Yahowah is offering. So there'll be another opportunity. And in the meantime, we'll continue to build the website so that people have a resource and can capitalize on it. So this harvest is another ode to Dowd and also to the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. He is our Savior, and he is the only reason that we're positioned to be able to capitalize on Shabuwah. Without Dowd's sacrifice on Matsah and on Pesach, there is no Bikuwrym, and without Bikuwrym, there is no Shabuwah. So with the lamb, the bull, and the goat, this Caesarea harvest is irrevocably linked with the family reunion that will take place 7 years later on Kippurym when Yahowah returns with Dowd. And that means that those harvested on this day will be returning with father and son to celebrate Yom Kippurym, assuring its success. Now, I think it's more than that, as we will have affirmed to us. There are 8 specific individuals that I think actually never, well, I should say never leave. They come back long before Dowd's return and are part of the team that support the effort of the two witnesses and will be the most senior upper level managers, if you will, going forward through the celebration of our return to the garden on Sukah, as it relates to continuing to communicate effectively through the Yahowah.com website, so that this mortal remnant of Israel grows and thrives and earns its respect with Yah. So God says, you should prepare and provide one satyr or scapegoat for going astray, and two lambs, a pair of lambs, sons, a year old, serving as a sacrificial offering to reconcile the relationship, which is shalom. This is Kara, called out, should never have been called Leviticus 23:19. So the satyr is a scapegoat, the one who bears the blame, if you will, for the flock having gone astray. And this is because the satyr is the instigator, the leader of the cult or gang, who initially inspires the horrible notions which sweep the compliant off of the proper path. The fierce male goat, satyr, is quick to turn against the shepherd and to instigate a whirlwind of tempestuous behavior. And to the unmitigated really extent, Israel has done this very thing, has been the satyr relative to their shepherd, Dowd. So moving from this nimble blend of animal and beast to the most diabolical of men, the satyr is representative of men like Paul, Luke, Mark, Akiba, Maimonides, and Muhammad. The demon-possessed, with circular reasoning, was used to mislead the masses. Can you think of just how frustrated God must be that Paul created the myth of Jesus to rob everyone of the gift of his beloved son, and that Muhammad created a religion in company with Satan by robbing God's testimony through their rabbis, selling Muhammad Talmud stories such that they were able to discredit Yisrael, Yehudim, Dowd, Yahweh himself, because of what the rabbis did. God's upset, and he really should be. Now, Jews have struggled as the embodiment of this satyr for a very long time. Evidence for this is found at Baal Gad, the lord of good fortune, as the town is devoted to the very satyr that we're discussing here and was well known to the Canaanites. This religious site is in no man's land, if you will, between Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, at the very base of Mount Hermon and the Golan Heights. As Baal Gad, it was liberated by Joshua, if you will, Joshua ben Nun, and incorporated into Israel. And for the next 1,000 years, there was no mention of it, as it was likely uninhabited due to the prevalence of malaria that was in the area, in the swamplands around the Galilee. Then, within a few decades of Alexander of Macedon's conquests, by the 3rd century BCE, the Ptolemaic kings resurrected the site as a cult center. Oh, they loved it. It was the Lord of the good fortune, the satyr, was reincarnated as Panaeus, replete with a cave and a temple dedicated to Pan. And Pan became the satyr of Greek mythology. The site, while not mentioned by Isaiah, was along with what the prophet called the way of the sea. It's a reference to its Gentile religious and political influence. So he mentioned it kind of sideways. Spoke of where it was located without actually mentioning the name of the fake god. The Battle of Panium was waged in this very place in 198 BCE. The Macedonian armies of Ptolemaic Egypt and the Seleucid Greeks of Syria, led by Antiochus III, fought a battle which gave the Seleucids control over Phoenicia, Galilee, Sumeria, and Judea. Under the Seleucids, Panaeus, which is Banias in Hebrew, flourished and became a place of great sanctity, and I mean that in the religious sense, as pilgrims came to worship this devilish god. And that is how things stood by the time that the Matsah, the Maccabean revolt took place, the internal civil war, if you will, in 167 BCE, when Panaeus, named after the satyr Pan, became a bone of contention. To their credit, should the Maccabean revolt have been fought to diminish the imposition of Greek culture, and to some extent it was, opposing the worship of Pan at Panaeus would have been a positive step. The Greeks were offensive and highly religious overlords. According to Flavius Josephus, who was, of course, a traitor and overall scumbag, in the War of the Jews, Book 1, he writes, now Antiochus, this would be the fourth king of the Seleucid Empire, born in 175 to 164 BCE, was not satisfied with the Judah Maccabees' unexpected taking of the city. The city would be of Jerusalem, nor of its pillage or of the great slaughter he had made there. But being overcome with his violent passions and recommending what he had suffered during the siege, he compelled the Jews to dissolve the laws of their country and to keep their infants uncircumcised and to sacrifice swine's flesh upon the altar, against which they all opposed themselves, and the most approved among them were therefore put to death. That was a quote from Josephus. Now, to their shame, however, the Maccabean revolt was less about foreign oppression than it was a civil war between Orthodox and Reformist religious parties among the Yehudim. They were fighting over who would be king, which was not a very lucrative title, and who would be high priest because, well, the religious title paid much more. The Reformists were vanquished just as they are today under Hasidic religious edicts. The emerging dominance of what would become Rabbinic Judaism, however, did nothing to diminish the lure of Panaeus, as it continued to be a cultic center with its cave and shrine to Pan, the goat-footed and horned god of the herds in desolate places. Now, this is not only germane to Shabuwah, God speaks of this goat as part of the process to rid us of the implications of what it represents, but this day was stolen by Twistians. And the single most important statement that is now attributed to pretend Jesus, made by Eusebius, takes place right at this place. And so, since Christians stole Shabuwah to make it Pentecost, it's relevant to our understanding of how Shabuwah has to be completely separated from all references to Christianity. I mean, if you are among those who want to have a new name for Jesus, and you want to make Jesus Yeshua, and you retain the Christian New Testament just with the new name Yeshua, then what you're doing is associating all of this pagan, satanic rubbish that was conceived by Paul and pals and just wrapping it up in a new name. So it's important that we know how evil Christianity was. The Greeks and Romans for whom Christianity was conceived were at this point, and how demonic they were. So that's why we're discussing this. This is actually germane to this particular topic. And because Shabuwah is so important to who we are and where we are and when we are in this timeline, we're going to go into this kind of detail. So buckle your seatbelt. Here we go. Pan, from whom the English words panic and pandemonium were derived, was considered malicious and decadent. His shrines were typically constructed in caves, as was the case, of course, with Panaeus. Born out of whoredom in Greek mythology, Pan became the god of masturbation, promiscuity, and the normalization of homosexuality, which was, of course, rampant in Greece. And Pan is even associated with, of course, bestiality. He's a furry. He's the first of the furries, man. He is an animal with a human face. So, yeah, for you furries out there, Pan is your idol. The Greek god is shown having sex with a goat in a statue found in the Herculaneum. More incriminating still, to seduce the moon goddess Selene, Pan became the goat in sheep's clothing. You heard that term? The Greeks and the Jews are not the only ones. I guess that would be interspecies now, wouldn't it? But the Greeks and Jews, they were not the only ones with an epidemic of Pan proportions. When Pan's death was announced during the reign of Caesar Tiberius, oh my God, Pan died? Say it isn't so. That was between 14 and 37 CE. The most maniacal of Christian apologists and propagandists, the aforementioned Eusebius of Caesarea, who was fascinated. I mean, he was absolutely intoxicated by the legend of Pan and Panaeus. Well, he extrapolated from the alleged death of the mythological Greek god representing the devil, Pan, that all demons had perished. Oh my God. That is particularly troubling to Christianity because Eusebius, he is the one who authored and augmented much of what has become the Christian New Testament, including the church's lone attestation of legitimacy. You know, it has just one, and that one doesn't appear in any first, second, third, or even early 4th century manuscripts. It isn't until Eusebius's Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, which are horrible abortions of legitimacy, because they have more strikeouts and erasures in them than most everything else combined up to that point. And it was done on the edict of Constantine, who was still a devotee of Mithras, all for political purpose. But he's the one who wrote it. And this devilish problem for the world's most popular faith perished with the resurrection of the Roman Catholic myth, which now reads, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it." The gates of the netherworld were Panaeus. All about Pan. He is talking in front of Pan, the Satyr, the devil of Greek mythology. And he's renaming Shimon as Petros in Greek, even though he didn't speak Greek. Well, he wasn't a real person, so what are you going to do? Calling him a rock, talking about a church that doesn't even have a Greek word for church. When it comes to obfuscating Dowd's accomplishments and transforming the Messiah's accolades, transferring them to a misnomer in myth, Peter was no better than Paul, but to be fair, what we know of Peter beyond the one letter that is attributed to him, which is very, very unlikely that he would have written, the Peter that appears in Acts or in the Gospels, particularly at this point, is a product of Paul's imagination, written by Luke, who was Paul's apprentice. So the rock upon which Yahweh builds his relationship with us, his covenant family, is both Mount Choreb, where his Torah was revealed to Moshe, and the cornerstone of that is on Mount Moriah, which is the home of Yahweh's name, and where Dowd established his city. God does not have a church. There's no mention of anything remotely akin to a church in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. There's not anything remotely related to a church in the Greek New Testament either, but that's a problem for Christians to deal with on their own. Or anything remotely to it. There is no netherworld, and Sheol, hell, does not have gates. Moreover, Sheol is a place, not a person, and thus has no causative capability. There is no prevailing for the gates of Sheol. It's an inanimate object. Every aspect of what Eusebius wrote was stupid, and yet that which follows, "You are the Christ" statement, only appears in two texts, both in the mid-4th century, both written by Eusebius. And it is the essence of Christianity. Without them, there is no Christianity. There is no Mr. Christ. This is really serious stuff. While this statement is credited to the Christian counterfeit Jesus, there was no such person. There is no legitimate basis for Christ or Christian either. But without these myths, the credibility of the Roman Catholic Church all vanishes. And that's what Eusebius was trying to establish. And that is why Eusebius invented this conversation in the 4th century, augmenting the Gospel of Matthew, and then Mark with this lone, albeit contrived, claim of legitimacy. What's more, the Catholic bishop alleged that this declaration was spoken, drum roll please, at the base of Mount Hermon, and what was then still Panaeus, although he called it Caesarea Philippi. It wasn't. It was Panaeus. It's a devilish problem for Christianity, at least for those who are thoughtful, which would, of 2.5 billion Christians, might be 3 of them. Under Roman control, Panaeus was so far removed from Jerusalem and Judea that it was administered out of Phoenician Syria. That changed in 20 BC, in BCE, I should say, when Panion, which included the religious site at Panaeus, was annexed into the kingdom of Herod the Not-So-Great. He immediately erected another temple of white marble in Panaeus, and all to honor his patron, Zenodorus. Then in 3 BCE, Philip II, the son of Herod the Not-So-Great, and his 5th wife, Cleopatra of Jerusalem, inherited the Satyr shrines in Panaeus, along with the northernmost part of his late father's kingdom. In a deal sanctioned by Augustus Caesar, he became king of Erythea, Gallatinus, Batynia, Trachonitis, and Aronitus, along with oversight over Decapolis. Got it? We attest tomorrow on these names. I hope you jotted them all down. Philip married his niece, Shalom, who was 39 years his junior. His niece, mind you. While Shalom is mentioned in connection with the fable of John the Baptist's execution and local folklore demanding his head in the story portrayed in the Christian New Testament, the account is undermined by more credible histories. He did not exist, and it did not occur. In fact, there was no John the Baptist. There was no Baptist. There were no baptizing. There were no dip in the Jordan River. All of it was written long after the fact, and the fact is that it never occurred. Nevertheless, staying with the story, King Philip chose Panaeus as the site for his palace, of course. Who wouldn't want to partner with the devil? Calling the adjoining town Caesarea, in honor of Caesar Augustus. In the Antiquities of the Jews, the only copies of which traveled through Eusebius' revisionist hands, Josephus referred to the religious center housing Philip's palace as Caesarea Panaeus. Another affirmation. However, to distinguish it from Caesarea Maritima on the Mediterranean coast, Eusebius renamed the place Caesarea Philippi, which is what he cited in Matthew 16, even though there was never a town by that name ever. But you're making stuff up. Why not? He actually wrote that Jesus was of Nazareth in multiple places in his renditions of his New Testament, even though the town didn't exist in the first century, but it did in the fourth. So who was going to be the wiser? Now, this wasn't actually uncommon. Eusebius, because to appease, this is the story, Constantine's mother, who in the mid-4th century directly associated Jesus with Nazareth, which was a town in the mid-4th century, but not in the 1st century. So to accommodate the emperor's mommy, you'll find it is Jesus of Nazareth now in the Christian New Testament, another indication that it is nothing but a fraud. Now, upon Philip's death in 34 CE, his fiefdoms were reincorporated into Syria. Caesarea Panaeus was renamed at that time Neronius in honor of Emperor, oh, this is such a good man, Nero, right? So you've gone from the gates of hell to Emperor Nero. And then it reverted back to Panaeus as the devil after Nero's suicidal death. So apart from Eusebius's musings, including those found in the Christian New Testament, not only was there never a town named Caesarea Philippi, Panaeus never lost its affiliation with Pan, the devil. This is highly indicting. With Christendom's fascination with casting the Satyr Pan as Satan, we can see why Eusebius made the absurd claim. And he says, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it. According to local lore, the cave of Pan was known as the gates of hell. Then, to sweep their incriminating laundry under a religious edifice, the Roman Catholic Church commemorated Eusebius' sleight of hand by erecting a late 4th century, early 5th century church on top of Pan's cave, all to honor the lines that Eusebius had composed. Now, reinforcing this myth, Eusebius, who was apparently fixated on this cultic center and absolutely raptured with the myths associated with Pan as the devil, he wrote this using his nom de plume. Having heard that Caesarea Philippi, now this is Panea because Caesarea Philippi never existed, so he's speaking of a mythical town, proving that he was lying, right? Otherwise called Panaeus, a city of Phoenicia, there was a celebrated statue of Christ, which had been erected by a woman whom, this is now the hallucinations of Eusebius now. We're not talking about history here. We're talking about a despicable man trying to prove his religious credentials and his mythical God man by creating a lie that's so big that, well, if you lie enough and big enough, people are likely to believe it, erected by a woman whom the Lord had cured of a flow of blood. Julian commanded it to be taken down, and the statue, I should say, of himself erected in its place. But a violent fire from heaven, of course, fell upon it and broke off the parts contiguous with the breast, and the head and the neck were thrown prostrate, and it was transfixed to the ground with the face downwards to the point where the frame of the fracture of the bust was, and it showed that in that fashion, that it remained that way until this very day, until right now, full of the rust of the lightning. If you're a Christian, your New Testament, it's authored by Eusebius, and he just told you this lie. That's the same man that wrote the single most important line in the Christian New Testament, and he's lying through his teeth. He's not even a good liar. By the way, the statues of the Romans can do lots of things, but they do not rust. And rust does not occur as a result of lightning. Not that that's the biggest issue here. If you believe any of what I've just shared with you from Eusebius's poisoned pen, as he wrote it, occurred, well, maybe I could interest you in one of the resort compounds that are in Trump's version of Gaza. There is no such place there is no such place as Palestine. And of course, I don't own such a result, and it hasn't been built, nor will it ever be built. But that shouldn't matter to you if you believe Eusebius and the Christian New Testament. There is, of course, more to the story. Eusebius conceived in front of the gates of hell. And I want to dive into that program, that whole train of thought as we return to this mythology. And I want to go into this detail pursuant to Shabuwah, because it is essential to Christianity to confiscate Shabuwah and call it Pentecost, just as they confiscated everything associated with Dowd to create the myth of Jesus. And it is so fake that I want you to have an appreciation for just how rotten to the core Christianity in its New Testament is, right to the single most important line in the Christian New Testament. Because if you can clear away that muck and you know it's a lie, then you're much better positioned to embrace the truth of Dowd and Yahowah, and therefore capitalize on the promise of Shabuwah and actually join us on this harvest. So I thank you so much for listening. Look forward to being with you again in another program of The Basics.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch y'all on our next podcast.